Well, the title of my talk today is The Tyranny of Shame, How We Are Held Hostage by Our Inauthentic Self. And I think it's going to dovetail what I'll be talking about with what Dr. Thompson discussed last week, maybe with a little different take in some areas, but hopefully will add to your thinking around this idea of shame and how it plays out in our lives. The first thing we need to do, and you may be familiar with this, but some may not, is that we need to distinguish guilt from shame. Okay? The experience of shame as opposed to guilt is that shame or guilt oftentimes propels us into positive action, believe it or not. Guilt is something that we can feel about an action we took or something we didn't do, and we can make decisions about, next time I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to show up for that, or it propels us into the positive, where shame, unfortunately, acts quite differently. The researcher Brené Brown has written extensively on shame and guilt and contrasts them in this way. Guilt is just as powerful as shame, but its influence is positive, while shame's is destructive. Shame erodes our courage and fuels disengagement. Marilyn Sorensen articulates it this way. Unlike guilt, which is the feeling of doing something wrong, shame is the feeling of being something wrong. Shame is an intensely painful feeling that we are unworthy of love. Carl Jung put it this way. I love this quote. Shame is a soul-eating emotion. Some of you may be familiar, that psych undergrads might, with Donald Winnicott. It's an analyst who has written extensively on the self. And he stated, other people's expectations can become of overriding importance, overlaying or contradicting the original sense of self, the one connected to the very roots of one's being. And we would say that God's given self. Okay? Some act out of a legacy of shame. This legacy can be covert or overt. Shame can cause us to act in ways that are irrational. We can be hurtful to others out of a place of self-loathing, and sometimes a brief moment of self-deflection where we're hurting the other, where we cause someone else to feel insignificant, can almost be soothing to us. The big light is turned off of us for a moment. Or if we turn shame and the intensity of that light on ourselves, it can sometimes feel congruent. This is who I am. This is how I define myself. But how does this legacy begin? And how many relationships are lost to this way of feeling, thinking, and behaving? The truth is that healthy people won't stay around for this kind of treatment. Other times, people are held hostage to the legacy because they can't leave. Reminds me of a case that I had, I'll throw in some pseudonyms here, in my private practice years ago, where I was seeing a 6-year-old girl whose family had gone through some pretty extreme circumstances. So the family was coming in, but I was going to be seeing her for a session. And I was finishing up with another patient, and I was running over a little bit, and I was anxious about that, but really needed to finish well with the person who I was in the room with. And as I'm finishing, I hear her dad, I'll call him John, I could hear his voice raising, getting higher and higher with agitation out in the lobby. And so I end with my patient. My patient goes outside, and I walk out into the lobby, and as I come around the corner, I see that he's pacing up and down and is very upset. And my first thought was, thank goodness there are no other patients in this lobby because he was a little frightening. And his 6-year-old daughter, I'll call her Victoria, Victoria was sitting on the couch trying to be as small as possible. And her eyes were big. And she's sitting there very quiet. And he starts to tell me how rude I am and how I disrespect him, I disrespect his time, and why was I so late, and they've got places to be. And it was this kind of exchange, or I should say, diatribe. I wasn't saying anything at this point. My colleague came out, and we did this nonverbal thing, and she's like, so will you stay with the little girl, Victoria, out in the lobby? So I asked John to come back to my office, and I said, can we talk about this? So we walked into the office, and I shut the door, and I sit down in my chair, and John is still ranting at me. In fact, he came over, and he put his hands on my chair arms and leaned in, yelling at me. And my supervisor came to the door, bam, bam, bam. Yeah. And she said, Tammy, are you okay? Do I need to come in? And I remember sitting there and looking up at him, and I said, am I okay? Does she need to come in? And he said, fine. And he sat down. Well, after some talking, we got to the root of the incident. Earlier that day, he had said something to his son that he swore he would never say. You are worthless. In fact, he said it with a finger in the chest, backing him up in the hallway to the linen closet. Boom, boom, boom. You are worthless. Okay? His own father had said and done that very thing to him on countless occasions. And he was devastated that he repeated this behavior with his own son. Behavior that was so damaging to him growing up. Well, I needed to meet with Victoria, so John and I talked just a few seconds more. I asked him to go to the lobby, so I brought Victoria in, her eyes still very, very big. She climbed up on the couch and whispered to me, were you scared? And I said, yes, I was. She said, did you have a funny feeling in your tummy? I said, yes, right here. And she said, oh, I feel like that when he yells too. And we had this moment of sharing what it's like when you feel held hostage to this kind of anger, this kind of acting out, the root of which was his shame at how he had treated his son earlier. Because this was a dad who loved his kids. He really did. Shaming was a powerful tool, though, passed down generation to generation in his family. It was a surefire way to stop anyone in their tracks. When we had more time to talk about what was going on with his son, John said, I don't even know who I am. I spend a lot of time pretending, and it makes me so mad. But inside, I feel worthless most of the time. And now I'm making my kids feel worthless. John was living an inauthentic life. John was living out what Winnicott calls his false self. Winnicott defines the false self as a defensive facade that provides the appearance of being real, but behind which we feel dead and empty. He contrasts this with the true self. The true self, we're operating from that position, is mindful. Okay? And if you know about mindfulness, it's about living in the moment, okay? Being authentic in the moment, living out what is happening in that present time, letting other things go by the wayside so we have a clearer view of the conversation, the person, the experience, God. We're available to ourselves through our true self. We're available to God if we're operating from that place. We're authentic. This is what we enjoy so much about little children. And I think why God asks us to come to him as little children. The guileless, literal world of young children is really wonderful. I remember years ago, before I had my own children, my older brother and his wife and their kids were staying with us. And my brother said to me, Tammy, everyone should have a 3-year-old in their life because you can't help but see the world in a new way every day with one around. And at the time, I didn't really understand. I was an aunt, and I was getting to know these kids and enjoying them, but I hadn't experienced it in the way that he was describing. But I got a glimpse into this truth the very next day when my mom told us that earlier in the morning she had been in the kitchen making cookies with my niece Steffi, who was 3.5. And they're making cookies, and just the two of them. And my mom had one of those moments, probably one of those mindfulness moments, where you stop and you're just so grateful for the experience. It's like, I'm just so happy to be here. I love this child so much. Thank you, this is all good. And she said, Steffi, we are making memories. To which Steffi replied with a look of long suffering, Grandma, right now we're making cookies. We'll have to make memories later. Get with the schedule. And we tell this story for years in my family. And Steffi, who's now grown, she just has that same long-suffering look when we talk about it. But she was like, look, we are doing this one thing here. Do not mess up the schedule. And it was just adorable and so true that young children approach life in a way that tends to be from the true self. It's over time when the shadows come from interactions, relationships, our brokenness really plays out. And it's harder to operate from our true self. Christ's sacrifice makes the difference. We're Christians. Christ's sacrifice makes the difference. As Christians, we are doomed to live, as Christians, are we doomed to live out our legacies of shame? Like the example of John, or something more covert. Sometimes it's not so overt. Covert, less definable, more insidious. The feeling you have, but you can't put words to, that something's off. No, we're not. What was Christ's death for, if not to release us from shame? Christ conquered shame through his death and resurrection. In fact, as Christians, we have an opportunity to claim a new life. Scripture tells us that we are new creations. We don't have to walk in shame, but are called to walk in hope. Brene Brown, who I mentioned earlier, puts it this way: shame says that because I am flawed, I am unacceptable. Grace says, though I am flawed, I am cherished. To live authentically, we need to claim this truth. What is stopping you from claiming this truth today? Is it that you believe Christ's blood covers everyone else but you? Your particular shame is too much for God to bear. It's too much for him to handle. Or maybe it's the repetitiveness of some behaviors. You think, God just he doesn't see me anymore. Maybe it's that even though you are living an inauthentic life, which can be exhausting, by the way, takes a lot of energy to live an inauthentic life. It's what you know. It's the rut in the road. It's the place that you feel most comfortable. And in fact, might be providing you with some sense of self-definition. If so, giving up shame can be really scary. In his book, The Soul of Shame, Kurt Thompson, who you heard this week during the Tory conference, talks about retelling our stories. We don't have to be held hostage to our past. In the narrative therapy tradition, we would say that you get to write a new narrative. And as Christians, we say that God rewrites that narrative. Shame separates us from God. What is separating you from God? Maybe it's some things like this. These signs come from a group therapy session that I did with some inpatient girls on a unit who, when we talked about shame and what had brought them to the place they were at in their various addictive processes, these are the kinds of things they wrote on Posterboard, like this, and then identified themselves in the room with what was at the core for them. Okay. We all have a poster board somewhere. Some of us have several poster boards of the shame that we carry, the things that separate us from God, separate us from others, don't allow us to interact in ways that are authentic. You know, to be in a healthy relationship with someone, we need to be operating from our authentic self. That includes our relationship with God. To be in a loving relationship, to be in a romantic relationship, to be in a relationship where you're hoping to partner, you need to be able to hold the good with the bad. You need to be able to understand that we all come with both. All right? When we live out of our inauthentic self, we can feel as if it's all going great, this is where I'm supposed to be, this is what God has for me, it's all good. And if something goes wrong or our friend or partner disappoint us, well, I see, this is what I thought would happen. Okay? And then it's all bad. Healthy relationships are able to hold the good and the bad together. But when we operate out of this inauthentic self, it's very, very difficult to actually be in relationships that are meaningful and meet your needs. And I think that is a definition of a healthy relationship. You get your needs met and you're able to meet other people's needs as well. So I'm asking at the end of our time here today, if you could take a moment and think about your poster board. What would you write? What would it be? And I'd like you to take a few minutes and go to the Lord with that. And maybe this can be the day that you give him the poster board. You don't take it with you outside.
Biola University prepares Christians to think biblically about everything, from science to business to education and the arts. Learn more at biola.edu.